This is From Both Sides, a spontaneous, free-flowing conversation featuring a dynamic team of women, providing insights into both political and civic events affecting the lives of women throughout Pennsylvania. And now, here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of From Both Sides. I'm Michelle Saletto, your host. Today we have a very special series for you, 2 shows about women in politics in Pennsylvania. With nearly 13 million people in Pennsylvania and slightly over 50% women, women do not fare well when it comes to representatives at the state and federal level. In the United States Senate, we have no woman representative. In Congress, with 18 congressional seats in Pennsylvania, there are no women representing us. And in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, less than 20% of the members are women. Do we fare as poorly in local elected positions? Where do women stand? Why? And what can we do about it? That's the focus of our next 2 shows. Joining me today to help lead the discussion is my guest co-host, Carol Achel. Carol, welcome.
It's always good to be here.
It's
Michelle.
great to have you back, and for our viewers, to remind them, you are a former county commissioner, a former candidate for the Pennsylvania Senate, so I think your observations about running will be helpful today, and also former Secretary of the Commonwealth under Governor Corbett.
It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much. Let's meet our guests. I'd like to introduce our first guest, Lois Hagarty. Lois is a lobbyist and government relations consultant with State Street Advisors. She is a former Republican state representative from 1980 to 1992, representing Montgomery County.
Thank
Lois,
you.
welcome.
Good to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Dana Brown. Dana is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Center for Women, and assistant professor of political science at Chatham University. Welcome back, Dana. I'll add that you were our very first guest in January of 2015 on our inaugural show. So it's been too long, but I'm really glad that you're back and you're here with us again today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me back.
Okay, great.
I'm delighted to be co-hosting this show. The women's movement, in my memory, started with Gloria Steinem and Bella Abzug doing women's caucuses in the ladies' room for the Democratic Convention. So, tell me, Dana, how far have we come?
Well, we've come a long way in terms of women's suffrage. I would argue maybe the women's movement goes back even
further.
Yeah, even further than that, right? In terms of thinking about Susan B. Anthony and others trying to get women the right to vote early on, and obviously took a break during the Civil War, which created some schisms. But so we have come a long way, certainly, and earning the right to vote finally in 1920. But since 1920 until today, we've seen some gains, but nowhere near parity in terms of women serving in elective office, not nationally and certainly not here within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I mean, Michelle, you touched upon it in your opening remarks. The Commonwealth has never elected a woman United States Senator. We've never elected a woman governor. And we currently, in our congressional delegation, do not send one woman down to Washington, D.C. And then you take a look a little bit closer to us, right, our own state government, and it's about 82% male. I think sometimes that really demonstrates the overrepresentation of a viewpoint and a lived experience when you explain to folks that it's 82% male in terms of the General Assembly. So.
But I was thinking about it today, and when you think about, we're one of the largest states in the country, and at the federal level, we have not one female voice, not one. Isn't that just unbelievable?
So one comment that when I was elected in 1980, there were only 8 women. Pennsylvania House of Representatives is 203 people, and there were 8 of us. And one of, I think, the impediments is we have a strong 2-party system in Pennsylvania. And political leaders, I was actually asked by my Republican leader to run for office. And so typically leadership in both parties really support, fund, and help candidates run. And it's difficult for a woman, if they're not kind of part of that establishment, to become a credible candidate.
But I think and another part of that, though, Lois, is the fact that in leadership in Pennsylvania, are there any women? I mean, really, are there any women who are in leadership in the Pennsylvania House or the Pennsylvania Senate?
Not in the top leadership positions. There are and have been for a number of years certainly not when I was there, kind of minor leadership positions.
Political science literature does actually map on very neatly to your own lived experience, in that our two-party system in Pennsylvania is one that is deemed strong. That's what we call a strong system. And when you take a look at all the 50 states, the political party structure looks differently in each and every one. But Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York have some of the strongest systems, and they're really rooted in our history. We are an old state, right? We are one of the original 13 colonies, so we are an old state that created party systems, frankly, that were created by men for men. And so some of these systems, in terms of seniority and whose turn it is to run in Pennsylvania, is rooted in this. And these are gendered systems, right? Thinking about parties supporting and running any newcomer, whether it be women, men of color. I mean, these are folks, right, that are frankly new to the political sphere in the traditional ways of running for office. I mean, not until the 70s did you really start seeing women running in their own right. And what I mean by in their own right is they weren't necessarily the spouse of a man who passed away and then succeeded and took his place. But so really not until the 70s you see women running absolutely on their own in their campaigns. So that two-party system is one, and the strength of the two-party system is one that is really difficult. And both parties, I will say, in Pennsylvania have made efforts of inclusivity. I mean, there are efforts being made, but certainly it's really difficult to undo hundreds of years of history and systems all within a matter of 2 decades.
Well, I mean, one thing that is also troubling is the way we district in Pennsylvania, or redistrict in Pennsylvania, because the seats are either districted for Democrats or Republicans. So women not only have to break into the party, they also have to look at the district. I know a woman who ran for a House seat here in central Pennsylvania, outstanding candidate, but I mean, that House seat was not districted for a Democrat. It was not set up for a Democrat. So I mean, I don't know how we really overcome some of those barriers that just seem so overwhelming.
Right, I mean, the incumbency advantage is one that women tell me all the time. Even if they're poised and ready, they're a businesswoman, they're a community leader, they're not going to challenge, within their own party, right? If it's a primary situation where we know that it's a plus 13 Republican district or something, right? And you're a Republican woman, you're a business leader, you're not going to challenge that incumbent. I mean, we know that it's very difficult to unseat a challenger. So you have to wait for these open seats, right? When do seats become open? Nearly, it seems like every 10 years based on redistricting, right? So we wait for these opportunities, which are once in a decade.
Let me go back to Lois's comment, because the Republican Party in my county approached me to run for public office. I was happy in my house in Paoli and was approached by the Republican chairman. And the message was, women run stronger in our county than men run, and we need someone to unseat a male incumbent. And you're it.
So Carol, that's exactly what I was thinking, and what will change is what was true for you and me. When party leaders perceive that they need a woman to win a seat for the party, you will see men, as they did in our example, asking us to run. One of the reasons I looked much more credentialed as a man. I was first assistant district attorney when I was asked to run. So, that was more the typical, wasn't a community leader, wasn't at home. I was a prosecutor, and so it was a much more, it was a comfortable fit for voters because it looked much more like a male resume.
I would caution folks that actually most people are not asked to run for office, and there's data out there that demonstrate that women actually do need to be asked. I mean, we're socialized. I mean, I joke about this, but we're socialized to wait to be asked to the dance, right? We're socialized to not really show our ambition and be entrepreneurial the way in which our male counterparts are. And so I would love and I would appreciate more women being entrepreneurial, but at the same time I would also love and appreciate if more political party leaders were out there identifying potential female candidates and asking them to run. But it's interesting that both of you happen to be here as Republican women who were asked, but that's actually very rare, and the data just show that that's unique. So.
Well, Dana and Lois and Carol, what about the Hillary effect? I think everybody saw this, at least everybody I knew saw this last year, the presidential race, as the year of the woman again, and looking forward to a woman president. What has been the Hillary effect with her loss? Have you heard anything, done any research about that? What do you think about that?
So first, I want to say I had and just a comment also on Katie McGinty in Pennsylvania. I had a very interesting discussion with a consultant for a woman who just beat an incumbent in the city of Philadelphia for comptroller. And so I asked him the question, because obviously I have a lot of opinions about what women have to do when they run, having done that. And what he said is women need to be competent and likable. And so first, let me comment that, my observation of the campaign with Hillary was she wasn't likable. I think most people thought she was competent. But to go more to your next question, I think the result has been, and where I see it most anecdotally, Dana may have more evidence than me, is women really felt, particularly Democratic women, terribly disappointed that women didn't support women. As we know, 52% of white women did not vote for Hillary, voted for Donald Trump, so did not support women. And I would echo that experience as a woman in office. Women didn't support, and maybe that's changing, women running for office. I think young women, though, are talking about and thinking about the need to come together and to support women, to look for women, to vote not for any woman, but for capable women. So I think it has had an effect. I heard one, person who, certainly would describe herself as a feminist, say, we thought the issue was over. We thought women really are moving toward equality in the political system. And she said this, was a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. So I think there has been an effect, and I think just in this primary, the little bit I'm hearing is that women, Democratic women, came out to vote in larger numbers because they recognized that they're not where they thought they were.
Okay, we're going to hold that thought, and when we're going to have a word from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
From Both Sides is a production of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy and is made possible by the support of the Pennsylvania Center for Women and Politics at Chatham University, a nonpartisan center devoted to fostering women's public leadership through education, empowerment, and action. The first to focus on women's political involvement in Pennsylvania, the center integrates disciplinary knowledge, civic education, and capacity building, while examining the intersection of women and public policy. From Both Sides is also supported as a public service by Saul Ewing LLP, a law firm with a 100-year tradition of serving the needs of business, government, education, healthcare, technology, and manufacturing in our region. And by the University Center for International Studies, the engine for extending the global reach of the University of Pittsburgh and its students. From Both Sides is also sponsored by Dr. Wendell Funk, one of Central Pennsylvania's most experienced cosmetic plastic surgeons. Dr. Funk is a leader in new and innovative non-invasive procedures like cool sculpting. His long-term experience with all types of cosmetic surgery, as well as facial injectables, keeps new and repeat patients returning to his practice in Lancaster, York, and Camp Hill. From Both Sides is also sponsored by the Ed and Jeannie Arnold Foundation.
Hello, and welcome back to From Both Sides. We're talking today about the status of women in politics in Pennsylvania. We were just talking about the Hillary effect and how women have to be likable and competent. And I guess my next question is, so do men have to be likable and competent too?
Well, we would like them to be, right? That's the ideal. But unfortunately, we do have different standards for male candidates. And so one male candidate could possibly be competent and perceived as extremely unlikable, but we know that voters will not hold that against him and actually still support his candidacy, whereas female candidates, we do not see that in the research from the Barbara Lee Foundation. So it is a bit of a double standard and also the double bind for women, because women are now stepping into these leadership roles that are gendered, right? When you think about an elected official, we're still talking about women in politics. We could all probably, in our mind, think of like a white man in a gray suit. So women are stepping into these masculine leadership roles. So how are you likable, right? Do you maintain that femininity and smile all of the time, right? I mean, these are questions that women on the campaign trail end up asking themselves, whereas the male candidates do not.
They don't even have to think about it.
They don't have to think about it. And
you know,
that's
Lois
right.
and I were talking about that earlier before the show. We were saying that certain women elected officials have a more, I think, maybe a more quiet demeanor, or a rather than the demeanor that I have, which is really kind of right out there. And so I've observed how some people react to those two different type styles, and it's a very different response. But I still find it hard to believe that people could not see through and believe that Hillary Clinton was the most competent person. I just don't understand how they didn't recognize her experience and
they did.
expertise.
The exit polling,
they did.
yeah, the exit polling demonstrate that those who did support Donald Trump very much question his competency on a number of issues, even including judgment, right, and temperament. I believe that the word that in the exit polls they asked was about temperament. And so folks still went and voted for him, even though they also leaving the polling place said, well, we don't think he has the temperament to be president. Yes. But they still supported him, which is why
This was where the likable factor, I guess, people wanted to vote for Donald Trump.
But they did not necessarily like him either on some of those
All right,
personal.
well then let's go to the people didn't like Hillary Clinton. That's probably
And I
frame.
think the
That's the
question,
frame.
and I asked people frequently, because I was so surprised at how much they disliked her. I mean, I heard, she's not trustworthy. I heard too much, we've had enough of the Clintons. But the level of dislike went so beyond that. I had a Republican leader, during, I guess it was after the primary season, asked me, or I asked him, are you going to vote for Trump? And he said, well, of course, Lois, you can't be voting for Hillary, can you? And it still astounds me, the level of dislike. And I heard everything from blaming her for her husband's indiscretions with women. I'm still not quite sure why that was her fault, but just really on and on. And I do think.
And something as a Republican.
Yes.
When the opposition party gets on a roll and they start in on Republicans, we're racist, sexist, misogynist, a basket of deplorables, that wears thin.
Yeah.
So the rhetoric, let's go back to how we talk to each other and how we represent candidates. And as a Republican, I got really tired of that.
But what does that tell us then about for women who are thinking about running for elected office, and how are they going to approach the race?
So I, as someone who studies women in politics, anticipated a bit of a chilling effect. If there was a Hillary effect, I assumed it was going to be a chilling one, meaning that women would be less likely to go out there and put themselves out there. Mind you, at the same time, we had that statewide Katie McGinty, Pat Toomey race, also highly negative, right? And so we had these two high-profile women running statewide races, and I thought, given the negative media attention and some of the language and rhetoric used, we would have a chilling effect. And here, as it turns out, and that may or may not have been true, right? Neither won their race. But now I'm seeing, what we are calling the Trump bump. And there's a Trump bump for at least interest in women in politics on both sides of the aisle, right? We have Democratic women who are energized as a way to fight back against the Trump presidency and the Republican Congress. But I'm also seeing a lot of interest from Republican women who are riding this high from November, when all of the poll numbers had indicated that their candidate was going to lose. So for Republican women, if you are a supporter of Trump, that is, then you are ecstatic in thinking that the world is your oyster, right? Literally anything is possible. So we're seeing, at least at the Pennsylvania Center for Women in Politics, a Trump bump in terms of the interest on both sides of the aisle, not the chilling effect that I had anticipated.
Okay, so we can expect to see more women running for public office. That's what we could expect.
Potentially. I mean, we're also going to start looking at these local elections in 2017. We have thousands upon thousands of races across the Commonwealth, and for the first time ever, my center tried to gather all of that candidate data, right, and to determine how many men were filing and how many women were filing. And it does seem, at least statewide, with a little bit over 50% of the filings actually are women. A bit more reflective of who we are. It is, but then it's gendered. So at least looking at who's holding countywide office now in like those local elections, we tend to see men running for those executive or legislative posts, meaning mayor, county council, county executive, sheriff, DA. But then when it comes to row offices, and the offices that are more administrative in nature, right, your recorder of deeds, recorder of wills, right, those types of offices, those are largely held by women. And so the filings oftentimes, that raw number can mislead folks into thinking about who's leading our local governments.
But of course, aren't many of those local races really stepping stones for women, hopefully?
Well, that's
Do we find that?
Well, that's the thing. That's the hope. I would love to have some of these women who are running countywide for some of these row offices to then consider maybe running for county commissioner, like you did, county commissioner or county executive, right? Every county is a little different. We tend to not really see that. We tend to see women, running and winning office at those levels and kind of staying there and maintaining that. And I always try to encourage them, look, you already have countywide name recognition. And instead of just being the one to execute the policy, perhaps it would be great for the county if you were actually a policy maker. I mean, because all of those positions are elected, but they have very different roles within county government.
But, that's really also consistent with some of the other research, isn't it, that women typically expect to be asked to run, whereas men jump up and say, I can do that?
Well, right. So not in there, right? Not on this set. We have these two women who were asked.
Right.
And so that's the thing, right? If women are running for these row offices and no one's identifying them and saying, hey, you know what, you're a great recorder of deeds, you have countywide name recognition, the party would support you if you ran for county commissioner. Right? Those conversations, at least from our perspective, they tend to not be happening, and women are staying there.
I do think in Pennsylvania, the Southeast is reflecting a different experience. We have a chairman of the county commissioners in Montgomery County, Lower Merion Township, where my district was, very significant number of women. A mayor just won, first woman mayor in the small borough of Narberth. I think most of the school board in Lower Merion Township is women. So I think it's a different experience. And your observation that, Carol and I are not typical in having been asked also reflects the fact that we were perceived as women as being able to win for our party. And so I think that was different. The other comment I wanted to make in terms of women rising up to the level of running for state legislature or state senate, at the age in which many women run and certainly might have a future in Congress, women have children, and women are reluctant to travel and stay. Well, but you understand my point. The men are not reluctant necessarily to stay overnight and to be away from home because their wives, even today, stay home with the children, or at least are perceived. I mean, the story that I continue to tell, so when I ran for office, I had an 8-month-old baby. He is 38. He did grow up and become a lawyer and is successful. Is a capable man. He was not marred. He does describe himself as a feminist, but I will tell you, I ran against, in my first race in 1980, a woman who was in her mid-50s. I was 30, so her children were grown. And one of the first events I went to was the League of Women Voters. And they were young women, active in their 30s. And it wasn't a debate, it was a get-together in which we talked. And as I left and thought that these women are my voters, this is me, The president of the league turned to me and said, "We don't think we can support you because we don't think you should leave your baby." So that
Barriers.
barriers
Yes.
was, was my experience, and I think continues to be an issue for voters as well as for a woman making a choice to run for higher office.
As we're getting close to the end here, let's talk a little bit about money. How does money factor in for women? Because I think fundraising is a critical piece of any campaign. Experiences? What do you think?
I certainly had good support from the Republican committee, but I also had my own funding base, which is never a negative in a campaign. So I think Lois had her own donors.
Not much to start. The
But then
Republican Party in those days, when they picked a candidate to show you how party oriented we are, they funded the candidate.
Yeah, that's happening less these days on both
Yes.
sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
It's much more candidate centered as opposed
Yes.
to party centered in terms of fundraising. But I can tell you that at least nationally, the data show that women are just as good as fundraisers as their
Absolutely.
male counterparts. However, we know that there is a perception among potential female candidates that fundraising would be a higher hurdle for them, and so that sometimes can act as a barrier and or deterrent. And then to that point though, we still live in a pretty homogeneous networks, right? Women tend to circulate amongst other women, and men for the most part tend to circulate amongst male colleagues. Obviously there's some diversity, but for the most part it's that way. And still we have a system where men do have a little bit more access to those moneyed networks, which means for women they may be able to raise the same amount of money, if not more, but they may have to make twice as many calls.
Might be a bigger
to do
effort.
it.
Okay.
Right? And that means you're off of the campaign trail knocking on doors. Instead you're doing twice as many, dial for dollars, the old call time, to get to your male opponent's level.
Well, I'm really glad that we're going to do a second series on this topic because we're already out of time. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank our viewers, and I want to remind the women of Pennsylvania that there's much more that unites us than divides us. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for our second show on women in politics in Pennsylvania.